Arabia at 4, and it's Hashemis 4 a.m.
until 5 when the show starts.
Weekday mornings starting at 5 on
Welcome. If you joined us, Evan Thomas is here, and Evan Thomas is the former editor at Newsweek, and the war being in Pennsylvania. I've always contended, he says, that the outcome of the Kennedy-Nixon election in 1960 caused Mr. Nixon to snap, to vow to himself he would never be outdone in a similar election ever again. Hence, the excesses of 68 and 72 elections. Your thoughts?
Well, it's a perceptive comment. I don't know, snap, but the Kennedys stole the 60 election. In Illinois and Chicago, that those were stolen votes. Nixon himself did not contest the election, which was pretty high-minded at the time. Nixon resented the Kennedys, but he really resented the Kennedys, especially when Jack Kennedy said to Richard Nixon, you can imagine how you and to the email. Nixon, it's true, thought the Kennedys were better at dirty tricks than he was. He was trying to catch up. Yeah, he's not totally wrong about that. I wrote about Bobby Kennedy. Bobby Kennedy was pretty good at espionage. I mean, Nixon was bitter, for instance, because his own tax returns were audited 3 times by the Kennedy administration. He thought that was vindictive. So when Nixon starts to use the IRS to abuse people when he was president, he remembering that Kennedy had audited his tax return. The Kennedys had a guy named Dick Tuck, who was sort of a gangster, a opposition research type gangster, who would do funny things, sort of funny things like direct voters, that kind of thing. And Nixon wanted to have his own Dick Tuck. Why can't he would say to his aides, why can't we have our own Dick Tuck to perform tricks on the other side?
Dick
what
Tuck.
they got was not Dick Tuck, it was Hunt and Liddy, the plumbers, who made CIA agents. They have been tough guys, but they were also screw-ups.
You have read that President Nixon did not know about the break-in before.
I think most scholars, Watergate scholars, he did create an environment in which that break-in happened. I'm not excusing him for responsibility. But he didn't actually know about the break-in. His problems came after the break-in. And it's not the usual version of him just, fiercely stonewalling. Nixon's problem was in his shyness. He was unable to confront others. He'd seen his parents fight, and he said himself, I got an aversion to conflict from watching my parents fight. Pat had seen her father beat her mother, and they just hated conflict. So Nixon could not bring himself to confront John Mitchell, his former attorney general, and the head of the committee to re-elect the president. He could not get those guys in a room and say, okay, what happened to you? He never did until the very end. It was way too late. Does he ever get the principals into the room? And even then, he can't bear to ask the question, if only in the summer of 1972, he had confronted his subordinates, even better if he brought in a tough lawyer, an independent lawyer, Nixon would have survived, he would have won a second.
To proceed on great projects and programs for building a lasting peace.
Now, maybe I am being too vengeful myself, But that doesn't really sound like an apology to me.
He had to be talked into it. His aide said, oh, you got to give him something. You got to give him some mea culpa. He didn't want to do it. He kind of did it grudgingly. There's no moral mea culpa. He would never say, I did anything morally wrong. And he did do. You listen to the tape of him talking to John about hush money for Hunt. And things. And Nixon admits to that. He's right about, he does it. He's about the cynicism and right about that. What a second term for better or worse. I think Nixon was full of regret. I don't think it was moral regret. I think it was regret that he wasn't allowed to finish the presidency. Yeah.
So, talk about lessons for presidential candidates.
Yeah, don't pick a fight with the press. I mean, you know, Nixon thought he could manipulate the press. What they all do now. Research and they could manipulate the networks some. But, you know, ultimately it doesn't work because the press, you know, the old expression was they own the printing plants. Well, now it's the internet way, the internet broadcast. But the point is the press is always going to be there. And if you think you can manipulate them and stonewall them, you can do it for a while. But you can't do it forever, and your enemies will.
To the Diane Ring show. But in effect, doesn't each candidate create his own press machine and fight back with sometimes the truth, sometimes lies?
Well, sure. I mean, that's politics. They've been doing that. They were doing that at Thomas Jefferson's day, much less now. They just do it with Twitter. I do think that the American people like some authenticity, and they don't like all the phoniness of politicians. It has a short term. It works. The consultants can tell you, we can drive our numbers, and you can for a while. But I think in presidential elections, eventually, the voters pay attention and they figure out who's telling the truth.
Let's go to Anthony in Long Island. You're on the air.
In my opinion, the case between Nixon and Kissinger proves the depth of the criminality of both of them. When they discussed the Vietnam War, they both agree it can't be won. Then they discussed withdrawal, and they both agree it can't withdraw because it'll affect his re-election. And from that date on, more than 23,000 Americans died, and millions of Asians died. These people are thoroughly criminal.
You know, you can't hear those remarks, the so-called decent interval argument, extremely cynical, but at other times, on other tapes, you hear Nixon say,